Okay. Yes, then welcome everybody to this workshop. My name is Andreas Müller. I'm the Managing Director of Democracy International, one of the main organizations here organizing the forum. And I'm happy that you all are here to our workshop, Citizen Participation in the Promotion of Transparency and the Fight Against Corruption. And yeah, just to give a little bit of an overview, what we are talking about today is we want to talk about corruption, about transparency in democratic decision-making, in democratic systems, and especially, of course, in elections and in the referendums. But we also want to clarify what we mean when we talk about transparency and anti-corruption measurements in these democratic systems. Furthermore, we want to talk about how these two issues, transparency and corruption, are related, how they are connected, but also what are the differences, what are the challenges for democracies with these issues. And on the other side, of course, and that's the main important thing, how can we use our direct democracy, citizen participation tools to improve or to tackle these challenges. I'm really happy that we have three wonderful panelists here. Unfortunately, one of our panelists had to cancel today, but yeah, I'm happy that we still can do the workshop with these three people. I want to welcome Anne Revell. She is from the US, right? And she was the chair of the California Fair Political Practices Commission, which regulates campaign financial issues as well as public official and government ethics. She was also a chair and vice chair of the Federal Election Commission in the US, which is primarily concerned with transparency of political funding as well as campaign financing. And at the moment, she's on the board of the Open Secrets organization, which analyzes political funding and corruption, as well as the president of the Silicon Valley Ethics Roundtable. Welcome, Anne, to this panel. To the right, we have Liliana Alvarado. She is the executive director of the Ethos Public Lab. Prior to that, she worked for the public sector at the Ministry of Finance and Public Credit, where she gained experience working on the tax policy, mainly on the competitiveness of the Mexican tax system and analyzing international tax systems. And she also worked with Fundar Center of Analysis and Research in the public budget area, where she was already focused on budget transparency and accountability. And in her work with Ethos, she coordinated various initiatives over the course of her 13-year tenure with Ethos, including, for example, she wrote a citizen guide to the national anti-corruption system in Mexico, where she will talk about today. Welcome. And next to me, we want to welcome Marie Jünemann. She is from Germany, a board member of Mehr Demokratie, More Democracy, an NGO, which is the largest, actually, NGO for modern direct democracy and citizen participation in the world, especially active in Germany. And yeah, Marie was active and is active in several ballot initiatives in Berlin and in Germany, and especially she initiated a citizen initiative in Berlin on the topic of transparency and freedom of information, and she played in last year especially a key role in drafting a bill for a federal transparency law. Welcome. Yeah, maybe what we want to do, we'll have three inputs from our three panelists and speak about different measurements from Germany, from the US, and from Mexico. And of course, I also want to include you in the second part of our workshop, that you share with us your experiences with transparency, anti-corruption measurements, and of course also the challenges you experience in your country. So yes, the first question I would have to our panel is, what do we understand when we talk about corruption and transparency? What are the differences, how they are connected, and why is it a challenge for democracy if we are not tackling these issues? Who wants to start? There's a second microphone as well, but maybe Liliana, you want to start?
Yes. Well, thank you very much. First of all, I think that it is very relevant that we speak about what is a relationship between corruption and also democracies. We all know that, at least in Latin America, many of the candidates, they always talk about, in their political platforms, they always talk about fighting corruption, right? But then again, it's very curious when you realize that at least in most Latin American countries, corruption has gone up, or it has, positive side of it. So it's also very interesting to see how citizens are not really, they don't really trust some of these democratic systems. Why? Because many of these electoral processes are, have corruption involved, also the electoral systems, and also sometimes the elections in themselves. For example, in Mexico and also in Latin America, we can see money coming from the organized crime, right? We can see cash coming and going and financing political campaigns. And we can see also that there are very little or inadequate sanctions for these violations of the law. So what happens is that citizens start like not trusting democracies, or even seeing that democracies in a way, they are corrupted by the system. So what happens, you start like not trusting the democratic system, and that the very risky part of it is when citizens start thinking about, are there any other political regimes that are better than democracies? And when citizens start supporting other much more radical systems, or even systems which are less democratic, right? So this is why we have to be very careful and tackle corruption, because corruption does affect democratic regimes. So this would be like a thought that I would like open for discussion. Thank you.
So I want to start by talking about the United States in its last midterm election, which was last year. And the connection between transparency and corruption is very, very, very close. And the reason is, in that election in 2021, 2022, there was $18 billion spent on those campaigns. 18 billion with the B. So an inordinate amount of money. And one of the problems that we have is that because of Supreme Court decisions, it is easy for very wealthy people to spread money to various groups, whether they be nonprofit groups, 501c4s in the United States, or to what are called super PACs that do not disclose where that money came from. And so people know in the United States, while they don't know the names of who's behind these huge contributions, what they know is they're trying to influence the vote, they're trying to influence government, and people feel that, once again, like in Mexico, that they have no trust in the government process or the electoral process because of this, because they know that either the votes or the whatever issues that get dealt with are by people who have been bought and sold by the most wealthy people in the country, but we don't know who they are. So the need, because there's also secret corporate spending, the need for transparency about these issues is huge. And when people know about who it is, then there is going to be less corruption. But unfortunately, we don't have a system now that allows that to happen.
Thanks. Oh, maybe we do it like this. Yeah. As Andreas already mentioned, I'm a transparency activist from Germany, and as a transparency activist in Germany, I have kind of a different focus, not anti-corruption as a very specific topic, but it is kind of sad and interesting in the same time that we in Germany have to take a step back and push for the general transparency of governmental information. So what I'm talking about when I'm talking about transparency, I'm actually talk about freedom of information in Germany. And freedom of information is actually just to give the citizens free access to governmental informations. And it can be each kind of governmental information, like protocols, treaties, the public spheres, are contracts that they do, significant data, expert opinions, lobby meetings, open data, everything. And why is this a problem in Germany? Actually, traditionally, we have one of the baddest freedom of information tradition and law in Germany. There's a rating from a Europe organization that compares 136 countries in the whole world, and Germany is on place 126. And also in terms of corruption, there is this famous indicator, the Corruption Perception Index of Transparency International. Germany is currently at the lowest since 2014, which has kind of to do with some scandals, and we are not really improving on this field. And how are those two connected? Those two political fields like freedom of information and anti-corruption. Just to give you an overview how this panel is connected and why I'm talking about freedom of information, and I'm sitting here with anti-corruption fighters. I think freedom of information is just a very first step for anti-corruption measures and actions. Especially the data needs to be available. For example, in public procurement, there are organizations like Transparency International who developed algorithms where they just let these algorithms look at the data, and the algorithms can say, yeah, corruption was at work here. That's kind of impressive. And also the pre-effect of freedom of information is important to acknowledge. So if a freedom of information law is robust and well implemented and enforced, it is much harder to act in this transparent environment, and it may discourage players from corrupt behavior at the first place. So yeah, I'm talking about a more overall approach for more transparency in governmental information, but I think it still has a strong link to anti-corruption work.
Yes, thank you so much. So, when I understood right, corruption is to fight corruption we need more transparency, and for transparency we need the right measurements. I know, of course, because we organized this panel, that we have several examples now how this can be done. Liana will talk about the Mexican anti-corruption system. I mean, and you already told us there is no real system at the moment, but you are fighting for that. And Marie will tell us about how you used citizen participation tools to get exactly this transparency basics, the right for information, to then also tackle the other issues. So, if there are no questions or additions to the definition or what we are talking about, what transparency and corruption is and how they are connected, then I would start with the inputs, because I think that's important that we talk about the same things. Are there any questions about corruption and transparency, about how they both are connected, or is that clear? Perfect. Good. Then, yeah, sorry? Yeah? Can
México tiene muchos necesitamos mecanismos de participación directa.
México tiene muchos mecanismos de participación directa, pero todos son utilizados para seguir haciendo crecer los cotos de poder dentro de los partidos que controlan las elecciones. En Ciudad de México utilizan los mecanismos de presupuesto participativo para hacer crecer a sus líderes y a sus partidos, a sus bastiones. Entonces, esos mecanismos de transparencia, desde el partido en el poder, es uno de los partidos con menos transparencia que te puedas imaginar. Entonces, de ahí se genera, en general, la falta de rendición de cuentas, porque si el partido no rinde cuentas, pues menos sus servidores emanados de ahí. Entonces sería
Sorry.
¿cuánto?
I just have to say we don't have, there's no translation. So if somebody can help us with the input, that would be great. Sorry for that.
Well, me dice si tengo que rectificar. but-
Maybe you can first of all explain a little bit in English what the question was about, and then.
Su nombre, por favor? Okay, what Francisco was telling us is that in Mexico we do have participation mechanisms. However, his impression is that instead of these mechanisms allowing for more participation, it's only helping the powerful, groups or political parties, in their favor. So this participation mechanism, and he also refers to participatory budgeting, how in his view, it's not working adequately. So that is his impression.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the input, because I think that's exactly what we will then in the second part discuss, what your experiences are and how we can improve that. So I would postpone that input a little bit to the second part and start with your presentation, Liliana, about what is already happening in Mexico with the anti-corruption system, but also then of course talk about your question or your issue that you have these tools, but they are not really usable for people who are really affected by these.
Sure, and actually, Francisco, I will be talking about the participatory mechanisms and how adequate or inadequate they are. So thank you for your question. So I just need to wait for
Give me
my
a second.
PowerPoint to be up. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to thank Democracy International and also the Instituto Nacional Electoral in Mexico for the invitation to what I think is a very interesting and also very relevant event. I'd like to start by saying that 2015 was a turning point for the fight against corruption in Mexico. As a result of the social unrest that derived from corruption scandals that unfortunately involved senior civil servants and also politicians, it was possible to joint efforts of different sectors and different actors, such as academics, legislators, also the public sector, and of course, civil society, to carry out a constitutional reform that resulted in the creation of the National Anti-Corruption System. So I will refer to that National Anti-Corruption System in Mexico as the NAS from here on. Next slide, please. Next. Thank you, Andres. So I will try to describe very, very briefly the general and main aspects of the NAS. And I will start by saying that the NAS is a model that seeks to coordinate all these institutions that are involved in the prevention, but also in the detection, in the investigation, and also in the sanctioning of corruption events. The model contemplates what we call a coordinating committee, a CC, and it is made up of 7 of the most important institutions in the anti-corruption ecosystem. Just very general, the CC, the coordination committee, is in charge of not only establishing but also evaluating anti-corruption policies. So I'd like to say that one of the most innovative aspects of the NAS, of this model, would be the creation of the Citizen Participation Committee, the CPC. So the CPC is made up of 5 citizens who, in theory, and you will see why I say in theory right now, are experts in the fields of transparency, accountability, open government, etc. Now, it's also very important to say that the general structure of the NAS, the national structure, is also replicated in each of the 32 Mexican states with certain and minor differences. The next slide, please. That one. Perfect, thank you. Unfortunately, over the years, we've detected a few challenges that have arisen that really have prevented the system from functioning properly and also from generating, well, adequate or the expected results. I will talk basically about 4 of these challenges, but I have to say that there are many more. The first one would be related to the designations. So although the law does contemplate very rigorous mechanisms for the appointment of key positions, and when I say key positions, I mean, for example, the prosecutors, the auditors, even also the members of the CPC, the truth is that some of these positions have been filled with people who just do not meet their requirements or very unsuitable profiles. And another of the problems has been the delay in the appointments. Unfortunately, some of these appointments have taken very, very long, also because of political will, but this has sort of paralyzed certain institutions. Likewise, there have been serious cases of corruption that have not been investigated due to resistance coming from certain institutions. And I have to say that this, among many other factors, has definitely influenced the high levels of impunity that we have in this country. And also, I have to say that the law contemplates also the creation of anti-corruption policies, both at the national and also at the subnational level. Also, the design and the implementation of these laws has been very slow. In 2023, we only have 26 of these laws when, like I said, we have 32 federal entities, right? And I also want to say that one of the main objectives of the CPC is to propose mechanisms for, in order for society to participate. But once again, I do think that not enough of these mechanisms have been implemented. And other of the challenges can also be associated, like I said previously, to the political will, or to the lack of political will, and also very inadequate budgeting for the institutions. Next, please. Well, I am convinced that the fight against corruption requires citizen participation. However, sometimes we assume that citizens are so eager or able to participate in public affairs, when the truth is that this is not always the case. And the first thing that I think that we should consider is the fact that not all of us have the same conditions or the same tools in order to participate. For example, there are issues that are highly technical for the general population. And obviously, these technicalities limit the number of people who can actually participate in a certain topic. In the case of Mexico, sometimes the information is only available in Spanish, or it's only available electronically. So what happens with indigenous population, for example, in Mexico, that don't speak Spanish, right? So if we do not provide the information in indigenous languages, or if we do not provide the information in other mechanisms which do not, involve the internet, how are they going to participate? So we have to think about which mechanisms are adequate for the sector that we are trying to reach. And when, next slide please. So when the NAS first emerged, there were many doubts around the system, about how it really worked, since the system is regulated by 7 regulatory laws that, I have to be honest, are not really easy to understand except for lawyers. So at that time, it seemed really impossible to think, that people would just download the 7 regulatory laws in their spare time, and actually that obviously didn't happen. So that's why at Ethos we decided that we had to publish what we called an anti-corruption booklet, right? So this anti-corruption booklet in Mexico is called the Libro Vaquero. So maybe some of these Mexicans remember the Libro Vaquero, and I say remember because this publication is no longer in circulation, but for the people that are foreigners that are here with us, I have to say that the Libro Vaquero is like a comic booklet and it was part of the Mexican popular culture. The Libro Vaquero was one of the most widely read publications in the country. It was distributed throughout the whole country at urban and also rural areas. So through this comic book, we were able to explain to the general population basic concepts like what is an NAS and why it is important. Next, please. So another initiative that we took in IDdeco, which was quite similar to the Libro Vaquero, was the creation of a technological platform that's called A Citizen Guide to the National Anti-Corruption System, a word to the wise. So this technological platform was targeted to not the general population, but to academics, also to civil society organizations. And it was also, it had a very innovative design. It had like a Mexican design to it, and also and illustrations, and also it was, it included like Mexican popular sayings and also proverbs. So if you're interested, you can also look at the platform. It's available online. And this platform does include like all the basic information on the 7 regulatory laws and the basic concepts of the NAS. So it really was targeted to a different population. So this is my last slide, and I really want to finish just by saying that yes, we need participation, we need citizen participation for the fight against corruption, but this really needs to be a sustainable citizen participation. And this is why at IDdeco we have committed to strengthening civil society organizations. I am a true believer that a strong, organized civil society is an effective counterweight that really needs to be nurtured in this country. Unfortunately, I have to say that at the subnational level, you won't find many civil society organizations that are really involved in the anti-corruption topic, and the ones that exist do face many challenges. So in this sense, we have worked with, like I said, for many years now with several civil society organizations at the local level, strengthening their institutional capacities, but also their knowledge on the anti-corruption topic. And based on this idea, we have created a network of 26 local NGOs in the anti-corruption topic. Like I said, this is a group of 26 NGOs who basically share challenges, share information, they talk to each other, they help each other. And this is one of the most successful networks in the country. And just to wrap up, I would like to say that there is no doubt that citizen participation is essential for democracy, but also citizen participation is essential for fighting corruption. And I am more than happy to be here devoting part of our time to speaking about this very relevant topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Liliana. We will do, you can ask questions after all our inputs, but I would have one, a question. You said that the objective of the NAS is, right, to have citizen-proposed measurements. And if, you can also do it later, but do you have examples what in the years maybe was a problem of corruption and what citizen proposed? One example or two, well, really concrete, that we understand what's really going on. Yeah,
more than saying that the objective of the NAS was to have citizens propose certain initiatives, I would like to get this straight. It's just that the system in itself has a really small institution that is called the CPC, that is made up of 5 citizens, and this institution, the CPC, is supposed to be like a bridge between citizens, between civil society organizations, and it is supposed also to design and to implement mechanisms so that individual citizens, civil society organizations, and I would even say the media, you know, like participate in these mechanisms. One of the things that I have noted is that throughout the years, the CPC hasn't really created enough of these mechanisms. And I also want to add the fact that citizen participation mechanism in the anti-corruption arena are a bit different than in other processes. So we do have to make this difference, right? Obviously, the government, for example, is not so eager to really put out certain type of information, right? So I would say that the most common ways in which citizens participate in the anti-corruption affairs and fighting corruption would be through social accountability. But I can go on talking about this, or you want me to stop and we can have a chat about social accountability later on, whatever you decide.
I would say we do it later on.
Perfect.
And I would like to ask you, Anne, I mean, you are really active in especially political campaign financing, and you already told us that $18 billion were spent on the midterms last year. So yeah, and I know that you're already fighting for that for years, but you already mentioned that, yeah, there is no such a system, but there's no system in the US at all, and also the Supreme Court made such campaign financing legal. But so, yeah, my question would be, maybe give us some examples of what's really happening, and what are your wishes or your goals to change it in the future, and how we can do that?
Well, what I'd like to do to start, it's not a specific response to your question.
No problem at all.
Right. But first I want to say absolutely citizen participation and citizen knowledge about corruption is really important to be able to fight that corruption and to fight the problem that we have, which is too much money in politics, and a knowledge from everybody that if there isn't information about who is giving that money, they don't know who's trying to influence their vote, who's trying to make influence on the politicians. And in the United States, there has been money given to members of Congress to influence Supreme Court decisions and Supreme Court appointments. So it's a very extensive problem that we have. And one of the things that I wanted to mention, because I think this shows why transparency is so important, and this happened when I was the chair of the California Fair Political Practices Commission. So I'm going to tell you a story about my involvement in this issue. In California, and for those of you who saw Schwarzenegger last night, you know that there are a lot of ballot measures on the ballots. And in 2012, there were 2 ballot measures placed on the ballot in California. One was to allow union members to engage in political activity using funds from the unions. And the other one was a tax measure that was initiated by Governor Brown, the then governor of California. And what happened was there was a complaint made to the Fair Political Practices Commission then saying that there was $16 million that was put into the election on these ballot measures, and nobody knew who was behind that. And so they complained to the FPPC, and the minute that I heard about that, and we knew that the group that gave that money, because they didn't use a phony name, which was Center to Protect Patients' Rights, there is no such thing. And not only that, but they've never protected anybody's rights. In fact, what it was money that went from very wealthy individuals to another group, and then to another group, which is what started the title, the name, Dark Money, because it was intended to be dark, so nobody knew who was behind giving that money. And what we did was, and this was before the election, which had never happened before in the history of this commission that I was on, But I said, you know, we have to find out who's behind this, because if we don't, the public won't know. And if the public doesn't know, it's going to impair what happens in the election, and so they have a right to know about who's behind it. So the first thing that we did was bring a lawsuit against this group, the Center to Protect Patients' Rights, that was allegedly in Maryland, not California, that gave all this money. And through that lawsuit, we found, and the court found at the Superior Court level in California, that this was inappropriate because they failed to provide more information about who was behind that large amount of money. They appealed it. The Court of Appeal agreed with us, and they then appealed it again to the Supreme Court in California, and literally within a few days before the election, the Supreme Court found that what they did was illegal. And because of that, no one had ever done this before. This was covered widely by the press. Everybody in California knew about this, and people were angry about it, very angry about it. And as a result of that, a couple things happened. One, the measures then passed, even though they were trying to stop them from passing. Both of them passed. And in fact, the governor of California called me and said, our measure would never have passed if it hadn't been for that information that went out to the public. It would never have passed. And that is absolutely true. And for those of you who might be interested in the history of this case, because there's a whole lot more to it, and if you have a Netflix account, there is a movie that I'm in. I'm a movie star. No, that's called Dark Money. And there's also a book called Dark Money that was written by a reporter for New Yorker magazine. So this has subsequently, though, become one of the major issues in politics in the United States, not just California, but in the United States. And the fact that this was publicized the way it was, and I like your comic book, seriously, because you have to find ways like this to make sure that people understand how their vote is trying to be altered by unknown people, and the fact that they're trying to have so much influence in the election and in the electoral process, as well as influence over the politicians. And people don't like it. They're very angry about it. And while a lot of people wouldn't consider that to be corruption, I think putting $18 billion in a campaign is corruption. And the fact that it influences not just local races, federal races, courts, it has a really negative impact on not just society in general, but on the political and democracy in California and in the United States as a whole. So I have more to say.
Yes, I would also ask you another question.
Oh, you are?
Because it's, thank you for that story, and I think it's really interesting, and because of your effort it became public, and it made an impact on the election result, or on the ballot measurements.
Right.
But still, as you said, there's still the opportunity to have this huge amount of money in campaign financing, and it's legal if you do it right? So in your case, it was good that you found the point where it was illegal. Right. And of course, especially from Europe, I told you about that in Germany. If there's a donation about 10,000 euro, it has to be made public. Are there any discussions in the US to change that system or what do you think would be helpful to make it at least more transparent who is financing whom? And And why is that not happening yet? Because, I mean, as you said, the people are angry.
They are. They're very angry. Actually, there are mechanisms, but they're not good mechanisms. I was also, after this event, President Obama appointed me to the Federal Election Commission because it was so well known, because it was unique and had never happened before. And the Federal Election Commission does require disclosure. And what that means in campaigns is if someone is putting on an ad on TV or on the radio, they have to say, either the candidate says, yes, I agree that this is something that I believe, but then whoever paid for it, the ad, is supposed to be disclosed. But on the issues that are very much like this, where the money goes, and this is called straw donors in the United States, and that's what happens. It goes from one multimillionaire to another person to then a 501c4, which is a kind of a nonprofit, then to a super PAC, and because of that, no one knows who's behind it, and they never disclose it. Although, you know, the FEC does, when they know about certain campaign contributions, they have it on their website, but that doesn't help. Nobody is going to be searching through their website to find this information. What they need to do, and this is, you know, my belief, I think they should change their regulations to require them to publicize it the way we publicized it, maybe not through litigation, but publicize it on TV or on social media, which is where people get their information anyway about campaigns. And if that were to happen, they'd have more awareness of what's corruption, essentially.
Thank you so much, and I think that is a great moment to include now Marie to that panel, because as you said, I mean, the question of transparency is also in freedom of information, how proactive should organizations or states or governments are to publicize things, or are they asking us as citizens to search on hidden websites in the internet about information on whatever. So, and this is exactly, I think, what Marie can talk us about, what she did in Germany. And Marie, you used direct citizen participation tools to improve our transparency laws. So I will share that. Give me a second.
Presentation. Okay. Yeah, it's about publishing public information. That's what my presentation is called. And what I want to show you are two examples of bottom-up movements for transparency. They really are from Germany. So, but first I want to have a close look again on freedom of information, what it is. So maybe, Andreas, could you do the next slide? Thank you. Because you have to understand one thing. There are two different approaches, as Andreas already pointed out. When you give information to people, there are two different ways to gain governmental information. And one is that public offices and authorities can be obliged to publish their files and their processes actively, as it's called the obligation to publish, or they have to hand them over to citizens upon request. This is the obligation to provide information. And what we want in Germany in 2023 is the first one, that we have a digital platform where all citizens can search for information from their government, what happened to their money, what did they discuss when they wanted to draft a law, where's the finance going. And this is actually an international standard in kind of some countries, for example in the Scandinavian countries. And we wanted this in Germany too. Could you put on the next slide? And to just give you another overview, here are some kind of informations that we want to publish. For example, it's about draft laws and comments on the draft laws, for example, by lobby organizations, agendas, papers, protocols, resolutions of the federal cabinet, public contracts above threshold value, because it's about our money, our public money, significant data of public-private partnerships or companies. That's actually pretty important case in Germany, because we have many public-private partnerships of companies who are doing public duties, like cleaning the cities or providing water, and they don't have to publish any information. It's crazy. Then expert opinions or expert reports or studies which are consulted in the process of drafting and deciding on a law, because so the citizens can really understand why a law is passed. And these studies are also paid with our public money, but we can't get them, or we have to ask, and then it takes months, and it will cost us money in Germany, so to have a request, and in the end, most of the time we don't get the information. I'm also talking about subsidies and sponsoring, lobby meetings, and overall open data, and much more what we want to be transparent. Could you go on the next slide? Yeah. This is a quote from Tony Bunyan. He's an ex-chair of the NGO States Watch, and he said, "Open, transparent, and accountable decision-making is the essence of any democratic system." And a journalist friend of mine always says that the full realization of freedom of information is actually the true basis for the full realization of freedom of opinion. So why do we do this? Why do we promote transparency of governmental information? Because journalists, civil society, and even the citizens need to know what's going on and form an opinion about it, and then decide who they're going to elect, and so on. Yeah. The next slide I think I already explained. Yes, so Andreas, you can skip it. That was, again, this connection to anti-corruption, but I think I pointed that out. So let's talk about our work in Germany. What we from Mehr Demokratie actually do is we publish a comparison of the different transparency laws in all federal states in Germany. It's called a transparency ranking. And here you can see the beginning of it and some federal states compared. And what I want to point out to you is that Hamburg, the city of Hamburg, which is also a federal state, is at the top of this list. And this is no coincidence. Mehr Demokratie in 2011 had a citizens' initiative which aimed to go to a referendum for a transparency law in Hamburg. It was an initiative and an alliance with the Chaos Computer Club, Transparency International, and us, and we collected signatures for that, over 15,000, and then the parliament has to hear us out. And in Hamburg at that time, the government had lost several referendums, actually. There were many initiatives who claimed things, and the government already lost some referenda, and they were like, okay, this transparency law has really potential. We should just do this. We don't want to lose a referendum again. And so they passed the law anonymously in 2012, the best transparency law in Germany. It was based on a citizens' initiative, on a direct democratic initiative. And could you go on the next slide? Hamburg nowadays actually is advertising for this transparency law and this transparency platform that was established with the transparency law. Here you can see the starting site of the transparency platform. You can Google it, and as it says on the right, 20 million people viewed it the last year. So this is a platform actually people use. And when you look, you can even look up what are the main search views or what people are like Googling in it, and they look for bike lanes, what is built there, protocols. It's really nice. You can really look it all up. It's really used, and it's a huge success story. So what we did, could you put on the next slide? In Berlin is a similar case than Hamburg, because we are also a federal state and a city, because we are so big. And me and other people in 2018 had the idea to implement the same transparency law as we saw in Hamburg, in Berlin, also via a direct democratic initiative. And as you can see here, it is a picture of the process of direct democracy. You have to take 3 steps. You have to collect signatures, then the parliament hears you out, then you have to collect signatures again, and then you have the ballot most of the time in the same parallel to an election. So because we have quorums and stuff, that's kind of complicated. And that was our plan. We wanted to have a referendum on the election in 2021 of our transparency law. And we wrote this law with many organizations. Andreas, could you put on the next slide? These are only some. We wrote this law with over 40 civil society organizations and journalists and lawyers. And we asked the whole city, all the civil society organizations.
I give you that one and then we change that. No problem.
Hi, nice. Oh, maybe. Okay, you can just tell me if you want me to stop talking, it's okay. We had over 40 organizations included, like environmental organizations, food organizations, housing organizations, and we asked all of them, what kind of governmental information do you need? And journalists, what kind of obstacles do you face when you want informations? And then we wrote a law, and then we went on the street and start collecting signatures. Could you show us the next picture? Here's a picture of our starting event with all of our organizations. Could you show the next picture? Here's how we collected signatures in the street. And could you show the next picture? And in the end, after 3 months, we could hand over 33,000 signatures for our transparency law in Berlin to the government. And then everything went wrong because that's a really, really specific issue. It's about direct democracy in Berlin. After our case existed, they actually had a reform. I just say it's actually mandatory to have a legal review when you have a direct democratic initiative in Berlin, because you can't do anything that's against the constitution and stuff. And it took 20 months, and our mobilization was dead because Corona happened, and we didn't know if our laws would be legal, but they changed that now, and yeah, that's the reason why our mobilization died. But next page, please. What was our outcome? We couldn't make it to the referendum, but there was a new coalition, there was a new election in 2021, and in the coalition treaty, actually, there was a passage saying that they want to implement this transparency law. The Green Party that is ruling right now and the Left Party, they decided that they will take our bill as a ground for the negotiation of the transparency law. So that's a success, and we have to see till 2026 if it's going to be passed. I have another example, but I'm talking so long right now. Maybe I can make it quick. Okay.
Yes.
Is it okay, Andreas? Okay. Yes. Let's show this. Okay, so what happened is last year we also had the new government at the federal level in Germany, and they decided also to implement a transparency law. So we also find it was a different starting point now. We had it in a coalition treaty, and we also formed an alliance, and then we don't have direct democracy on the federal level. So what we did is we used the participation tool, just like there are many, and Andreas, maybe you can show it. It's in the internet platform. And we had over 400 comments on our law. We also asked journalists, civil society organizations, and citizens from all over the country to make comments on our transparency law, what they need from the government, and what kind of information they're interested in. And this was really a good success. But as Liliana said, this whole topic of transparency and anti-corruption is kind of for the nerds. So if you can't show it, it's okay.
Let's see.
Por favor? Yes.
Yeah, no,
can
yeah.
So this was our site, how we participated the people. In the beginning we explained what a transparency law is, then there's even a video which explains it, and then there you see the law, really the text of the law, and people could just mark it and say, and then type comments into it and discuss with each other. And I was surprised also how well this worked. We had 400 comments, really from practice and experts from all the states. And yeah, we wrote a really good law, and this is this platform is called Consul. It's open source, it's free, you can just do it. I can really recommend this. So maybe to come to an end, could you jump over some slides to the last two ones, please? And we handed this law over to the government, and they promised that they will do something with it. This is, yeah. But to come to the last key learnings from these two initiatives, I want to point out that in Germany, a major influence lies within the executive body, and the problem is that in that case transparency laws are drafted by the ministerial bureaucracy, which then comes from those bodies that have to impose more openness on themselves. And that's a problem in Germany, actually. And the necessary corrective impulse has to come from those who speak for the entities of transparency, namely the interested public, journalists, and so on. And we can see in Germany that the limits of willingness to reform freedom of information do not lie between parties, but, as experience has shown, between the government and the opposition. And so direct democracy and participative instruments are fundamental for us to write good transparency laws, and it's an essential non-parliamentary motor for advancing this issue in Germany. So that's our experience, and I would be very interested in learning if it can be a motor in Mexico and other countries too for transparency, or if you face other obstacles. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Marie. Also for you, another question, if that's okay. So you wrote these laws in Berlin, and you also now this law for the federal level in Germany. So where are we now? Is it implemented? Or what is the actual status of that laws?
No, it is not. In Berlin, as I said, it was kind of a problem with the direct democracy itself, that our mobilization ran out, that it took too long to review our law. And the Social Democrats, who are forever in the government right now, for 20 years or something, they are always re-elected. I think the problem is they are too long in the government. They have no interest in this transparency law at all. And really a window of opportunity is, I think, now at the federal level, because we have a new government there with the Greens and the Liberals and the Social Democrats. They haven't been in the government for 16 years. They know how it is to be in the opposition and to get no information at all. And I think this is a huge opportunity that we have to take.
Yes, thank you. So, just to summarize a little bit, we heard about the mechanism, anti-corruption mechanism in Mexico, about the problems, but also fights for transparent campaign financing in the US, and how to on examples of direct democracy and citizen participation to mechanism tools to fight and or to tackle the issue of transparency. And yes, I wanted to ask you if there are some questions. Sorry. Yeah, let's start here and then we go. We have enough time. So I come to you. Sorry? Okay, thank you. No, I do it.
Thank you to all three of you for wonderful presentations. Oh, but we're not supposed to say thank you. My question is, well, we've talked about corruption, we've talked about transparency, and I think it would wrap it up nicely to talk about accountability, right? The only way, voters have of holding politicians and sometimes public servants accountable is through, retrospective voting, right? But that's not always effective. So I'd just like to pick your brain on the challenges for, for holding people public servants accountable after acts of corruption, from all three perspectives and from very different stages in terms of the advancement of the rule of law in the three countries you represent.
Does anybody want to add something to that or to comment?
I would really say that the challenges in order to hold the governments accountable will be related to lack of trust, apathy, and indifference. Because if you as a citizen or as a civil society organization, you feel that there won't be any, a result coming from you reporting a corruption incident, so what is the point? Right? What is the point of participating or trying to hold the government accountable or reporting even, right, corruption cases or corruption incidences? And this is very dangerous, right? When people do not want or do not feel that there's a point in actually reporting anything because nothing is going to change, right? So I would say that, yeah, once again, lack of trust, indifference, and apathy are the biggest challenges to holding the government accountable. But another thing, I just want to add something quickly. Let's also not forget that there are other actors that we should also try to hold accountable, and one of these actors would be, for example, also the private sector. Right? The private sector is also involved in frauds, like money laundering, and there's also a lot of corruption cases that involves private sector and also government in procurement processes, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that we should definitely also try to put the private sector into the equation, right? Also, trying to make also the private sector accountable, working with MSE, small and medium enterprises, so that they can have, for example, their compliance also divisions. I mean, let's just not focus in only the public, the public sector, but let's also include into the equation the private sector.
Thank you. Yes?
I agree with that. Generally, in the public sector, there's a difference between elected officials and those people who are public servants. And clearly, public servants have an obligation to have the highest ethical standards and should be subjected to, if people see that they're doing something that is corrupt or inappropriate for any reason, there should be good, strong rules so that there can be whistleblowers who can speak to those issues, talk about them, and make sure that there is some accountability within the government. In the elected office, it is much more difficult to do anything about it. I mean, I just have to say, we have had people elected to Congress recently in the United States who lie about everything, and nobody's doing anything. And in fact, if anything, Congress has started to make changes in the ethics office of Congress, and they're not really taking any action, which is a terrible thing. And it should be changed, but whistleblowers aren't going to help in that regard.
As a political scientist and democratic activist, I would say the main sanctioning mechanism for which is for accountability is not to re-elect people, but you can't do that when it's in the administration, right? And so what I already said is, in Germany, we have a major influence from the executive body in passing laws. And this body is completely intransparent. You can't imagine it. Even in Mexico, it's better. I talked with one on the tour, and he said that within 15 days, informations have to be published in Mexico. And so I think all the procedures like re-elections, direct democracy, and so on, all good instruments to hold people accountable are not good if you don't have transparency in the beginning to really find out what's going on.
Thank you. There was the next question.
Thanks. Hi, my English is a bit rusty, but I'm going to try my best to ask my question. I have a question about transparency at a constitutional level. I'm right now I was working in the Constitutional Assembly in Chile that we lost recently. I'm working again in the new process that opened up a couple of months ago. And we had in the constitutional proposal 2 full chapters about citizen participation and one about good government and public function. Given that one of the main issues that we have is how the social contract is perceived by the population, what do you recommend about implementing anti-corruption laws, anti-corruption guidelines at a constitutional level, or do you think that it's more efficiently done at a law level or at a citizen or at a local level? We are having this discussion right now. One of the main issues that we had with the Constitution is that it was a really extensive Constitution. So I wanted to know what is your perception around that issue. Thanks.
Thank you. Anne?
Well, my view on that is that it would be better to have those prohibitions or clarity in the law in the Constitution, because the Constitution is the preeminent law, and you don't have to rely on lower-level elected officials to do some self-reporting or to take responsibility for certain things. So if Chile can once again, this time, pass the new constitution that they've been given the ability to write another constitution after the other one was not accepted. I think it's the best way to have it at the highest level, because it is almost that the Constitution, if well written, should be the law of the land and protections for all of the population.
I would also agree with Anne that perhaps having the modifications at a constitutional level would be best. But just looking at the Mexican national anti-corruption system, and like I said, we did have a modification at the constitutional level, I would also suggest on thinking about what are the mechanisms to make subnational governments really apply, the requirements that have been established by the Constitution. Because we've seen how states here in Mexico, there are many challenges in the way that they are implementing the local anti-corruption systems. And like I said before, some of these obstacles are you would say are not so important, but they are. In practice, they are. Having, for example, institutions when they cut the budget, right? So the institutions are just paralyzed, right? Right now, the CPC at Mexico City was just dissolved, right? This citizen participation committee that I was talking about, because no money or no budget was given to the CPC. So what's the point on having a very good, legal framework if when you're going to implement all these rules, there's so many ways to just not follow the rule, right? One thing would be budgeting, but another thing would be like I said, the appointments, right? The appointments are not made, so the institutions are paralyzed. Here in Mexico, just yesterday, we had the appointment of 2 of the commissioners from the INAI, but the appointments had been waiting for almost a year. Right? We were really worried that if this happened and no appointments were made up till April the 1st, the institution would have been paralyzed, right? So this is also related to political will, right? So yes, it is very important to have a good design, at a constitutional level, and also perhaps a good design at subnational levels, but you really have to think about what are the ways in which governors or practitioners can not implement the law,
Thank you.
Negative person you are.
I don't.
Okay. Then we go to the next question.
Hi, y'all. My name is Michael Drashkovich. I'm from Los Angeles. One of the groups I'm helping out in Los Angeles is trying to introduce democracy vouchers to the city, where every resident is issued 4 $25 vouchers that they can contribute to any campaign, local campaign that they wish. In order for that program to be successful, helping diversify the donor pool, the candidate pool, the candidates that get elected who really represent communities and not outside or special interest, getting the word out is really important. So I'm curious, a theme on the panel has been, partnering with a comic book. There's a film that's helped talk about transparency. And then in Berlin, it sounds like this website and the campaign generated 20 million visits. That's outstanding. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about how you've been able to generate that interest and usage, most importantly, with groups you want these policies to reach the most. Thank you.
Should I start?
Yeah, Marie.
I think it was actually the example of Hamburg. And this platform in Hamburg, it's like now 10 years old, this transparency platform. And I think one crucial point is that we have a really vibrant civil society in Germany. As you saw, we had over 40 organizations supporting our claim in Berlin. And these are all stakeholders. They are all representing people that are interested in their topics. And it is most of the time a huge amount of people. And so in Hamburg, it was the same thing. We had this direct democratic initiative, and they collected signatures all over the city, and they had so many supporting organizations. But in the beginning, no one used the platform. It's now 10 years old. And I think what really pushed it forward was that, it's kind of funny, the administration themselves use it. I think 50% of this 20 million views is from the administration, because we are not really good digitalized in Germany, actually. And they use it by themselves. And there are neutral bodies that promote this platform, neutral bodies that it's all coming together, I think. Yeah, and the word spread, and now people and organizations after 10 years really use it, and that's really nice. But if you look at the words searched in this portal, it's like bike lanes. What's happening? I don't know. What is the housing market or something? Like really, what the people care for in the city.
As I'm sure you know, democracy vouchers have been a huge success in Seattle and some other places, and has really diversified the voters. And I think the way to get it out in the United States, because we have such poor local newspapers, that people don't really trust them anyway. They don't trust a lot of the media, that probably the best way to do it is online and to try to get the word out to all these different groups and ask them also to post them on their sites and the like to get the information out. Because I think this is something that is not going to be negative to anybody. It's a good thing for everybody because they can make their own decisions with the voucher, and they can, as a result, have a lot more power in the electoral process. And people are very untrusting, as you know, of the electoral process as well, which is one reason why I think that a good way to do it is to advertise it by other groups, with other groups.
I'm sorry, but I didn't get the main part of the question. Could you please repeat it?
I give you the microphone. Give me a second.
You know, I'd love to actually hear what recommendations you would have for groups who want to work with a comic book or publication to get their issues into them, to get it to a wider audience.
Okay. Yes, I think that it is very important to first of all think what groups you want to target, right? It is not the same thing if you want to target the general population, like the Libro Vaquero or the anti-corruption comic book was very efficient for that. but it's not the same if you want, for example, the younger population to get involved. At ETHIS, for example, we also did like a hackathon, right? So we wanted to involve the young population with all like their technological like expertise in building an application where citizens could also report corruption cases, and it was also very successful because, I mean, at least in Mexico, the young population is not very involved in these issues, right? So you have to think about who you want to reach, right? Like I said, if you want to reach indigenous population, we do work with indigenous population in the state of Chiapas, in trying also to involve them in participatory mechanism. And the first things that we are trying to do is fight for in order to have public information and access to information in indigenous languages, right? So if we think about just designing mechanisms for everybody, you know, like just thinking that we're all the same, that we want to be reached through the same mechanisms, that's not right, right? That won't work, right? So this is why I think that some of these mechanisms need to be tailored to that specific actor or to that specific population in order to make it work. We not only, like I said, had the comic book, right? But we also had the technological platform for academics and for NGOs. And we also had like the hackathon where we involved the young population. But we also did some publications that were quite technical, right? And all of these different projects and initiatives were based around the same concept, which was just trying to understand the national anti-corruption system, but also through trying to understand who do I want to reach, right? And how do I want to reach this audience? And like I said, there's nothing more, I mean, for think tanks and for organizations like us to actually like design a specific project and then seeing that you did the platform, yeah, but who's actually downloading, who's looking at it? Like no one, you know, like what happened here, right? Or like, yeah, we did like for example, if you do a hackathon and nobody, you know, it's like registering to participate. So it's like, okay, so what is going on? So you also have to sort of like learn, right? I have to say that there's no like one single approach that works in every country and that works for all types of population. So it does have to be like tailored to each actor, to each sector.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one other question. Yeah, you want to ask? Perfect.
Gracias, la voy a hacer en español. Bueno, primero quisiera compartir que en el caso de México tenemos en el Instituto Nacional Electoral un órgano fiscalizador para los partidos políticos para que el recurso que se utiliza en las campañas sea fiscalizado. Sin embargo, se ha tenido que robustecer de tal suerte que cada vez que digamos que se ponen candados para que no se pueda acceder a dinero, digamos, sucio o proveniente de manera ilegal, y se ha tenido que robustecer tanto que cada vez se encuentran otros como mecanismos o otros espacios para poderse saltar esas normas o esas reglas. Y he escuchado en México personas que dicen que en Estados Unidos el sistema abierto que permite que ingrese dinero privado o mucho dinero privado es mejor. Sin embargo, ahorita que escuchaba el caso que comentaba, no necesariamente es así. Entonces, mi pregunta es si habría como un punto medio entre no fiscalizar tanto, que sea tan robusto ese sistema fiscalizador, pero tampoco que sea tan abierto de tal suerte que no sepamos qué empresas privadas y con qué intenciones incluyan el dinero en las campañas. Porque algo que se pensaba que en Estados Unidos funcionaba con este dinero privado es que sabemos de quién proviene y que entonces sabemos cuáles son los intereses y que es, digamos, algo que funciona porque ese ciudadano o ciudadana va a elegir porque comparte los intereses de la gente que está metiendo dinero en los partidos políticos. Sin embargo, si estas empresas no tienen esos mecanismos de transparencia o de fiscalización, pues tampoco el ciudadano está escogiendo de manera real, o las y los electores no están eligiendo de manera real esos intereses porque tampoco los conocen. Entonces, mi pregunta es si hay como un punto medio entre esas dos posturas. Gracias.
Everybody's looking at me, and you had like such a long comment / question. So the first part of your comment was that at the electoral institution in Mexico, we do have like a division that is in charge of following the money. Yep, sort of. And but they have actually realized that probably like the legal framework is always laying behind. You know, there's like maybe all the time there's new ways in which like illicit financing is happening, and the legal framework is always behind. That was the first part. Y después de decir que siempre hay un como retraso en digamos, en el seguimiento del dinero, ¿cuál era la pregunta? Okay, ahí voy, espérame. In the case of the US, there's a lot of private money financing elections, right? And she has the perception that it's also like less strict, like financing is less strict, right? Ahora sí, ¿qué más? So do you think that there is perhaps a correct balance between being less strict or being very strict, you know, in like trying to hold that money accountable? Is there like a balance?
Yeah. Yes, I think there is. And in the United States, I mean, aside from the fact that there's corporate money and dark money that I spoke about, there are limits on campaign contributions from individuals, and those limits are respected. That part of the law is respected, no question. If you give contributions directly to a candidate's campaign, and there's a limit of $5,000 for Congress, there's a lower limit for some other places, a little higher for the president. So it's, and I think it's a good thing because that, aside from how important democracy dollars would be, because you get more diverse people being able to participate in campaigns, it is a good thing for people to support candidates that they care about as individuals if they have those limits and follow them.
And if I may, I would just like to make a quick comment.
Last comment.
Last comment. All of this story about the dark money that you were speaking about, it's not cash, right? Or it can be, because I also believe that a big problem that we have here, and I mentioned it at the beginning of the session, is the fact that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that there is a lot of cash money financing campaigns here in Mexico, and like I said, lots of money coming from the organized crime, and I see when she says that the regulations and just lay behind. Right? So we're not being able to catch up with how to control that money, and so the money is not being followed, because like following cash is really difficult, right? So yeah, that is a big problem in Mexico, at least.
Yes, it is, but that's the obligation of the party or that's receiving it. Like I know in the election that I observed, there was money from cartels that went to Modena. And so I know that. And that it should be their obligation, or the obligation of the candidate, to disclose it. I know.
Yeah.
No, I know. A pie in the sky idea.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. I'm really sorry that we have to close because, you know, there's another event this evening, and as I heard, there's a protest in the city. I don't know what the topic is about. So the walk is a little bit longer, and I got a message that we have to go a little bit earlier to for everybody who wants to go there. So we close now and then go to that. But thank you so much. I think we learned a lot about the importance. I think a little bit was also about education, informing people about the topic, about tools we can use, examples, and of course, but also the changes, the follow the money question, which is sometimes not so easy. And yeah, I think we agree that we have to do something about it, and yeah, that we try to have another workshop next time, and in the next days, of course. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah, as I said, there will be a guided walking tour to the next event. So everybody who is registered can, of course, come. And also, I heard that there are some seats free. So if you want to try it, I cannot promise that there is a space for you, but it seems to be possible. So yeah, we go to the Casa de la Primera Imprenta in America, so could be interesting. The topic is, are elected presidents bad for democracy? So thank you, have a nice evening, and bye-bye. Thank you so much. Thank you also for translating. The translation didn't work.
I don't know if I did a good
No, thank you so much. So
I did my best.
did the moderation at the end because I could not really understand the
Of
question.
course.
So, but thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Thank you for your input.
Oh, can we take a video break now?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
Porque hay unas camionetas
I stay here at the side. It was the female workshop that was right.
¿En qué otra está? Ok, vamos a pasar por usted antes de pasar para llevar la lista ahí. Si puede llevar la lista ahí. ¿Qué tal? Está a una cuadra. Sí, o sea, saliendo del one a la derecha. Y ahí está el que está bien ahí.
Thank you so much.
Están desde antes de...
Na, wie war's?